The symphony of Arya Morgan's life was composed in quiet, patient notes, the scent of aging paper, the subtle spice of leather glue, and the profound silence of centuries resting on the shelves of her studio. Tucked away in a cobblestone alley in Boston's historic North End, her world was a sanctuary from the clamor of the modern age. She was a restorer, a healer of books, her gentle hands coaxing life back into decaying bindings and faded ink. She didn't just fix objects, she preserved the souls of the stories within them. Tonight, however, the outside world was clawing at the edges of her sanctuary. A ferocious November nor'easter raged against the city, its wind shrieking through the narrow alleyways, flinging sheets of icy rain against the large studio window. The warm, focused glow of Arya's desk lamp felt like a fragile candle against an encroaching ocean of darkness. She was hunched over her workbench, her concentration absolute as she performed a delicate operation on a 19th century maritime logbook, its pages brittle with salt and time. That's when the sound came. It wasn't the wind or the rain. It was a soft, wet thud against the brick wall outside, followed by a faint, desperate gasp almost stolen by the gale. Arya froze her tools, held motionless above the fragile page. Her alley was a dead end, a place of dumpsters and shadows rarely used by anyone, especially not in a storm of this magnitude. Her first instinct, born of a lifetime of city living, was to ignore it, to retreat deeper into the safety of her work, but her profession had taught her a different kind of sensitivity. She knew how easily a fragile thing could be broken, how quickly a story could be lost forever. With a sigh that feathered into a cloud in the cool air of the studio, she set down her tools. She grabbed the heavy, old-fashioned umbrella she kept by the door and unbolted the locks. The moment she pulled the heavy oak door open, the storm lunged at her. A blast of wind and freezing rain hit her, carrying the metallic scent of wet pavement and urban decay. She stepped out, squinting into the maelstrom, and then she saw her, a figure huddled at the base of the wall where the alley met the street. It was an elderly woman, her silver hair plastered to her forehead, her body racked with shivers. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat, an item so ludicrously out of place in this grimy, forgotten corner of the city that it was like seeing a swan in a gutter. One hand was pressed tight against her chest, her knuckles white. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Arya called out, her voice nearly snatched away by the wind as she hurried to the woman's side, angling the umbrella to shield her from the worst of the downpour. The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were a startling shade of emerald green, and even clouded with pain. They held a sharp, fierce intelligence. "Please help me," she whispered, her voice laced with the ghost of a refined, old-world European accent. "My heart!" The woman gasped, her fingers clutching at the expensive fabric of her coat. "I think my heart. I'm calling an ambulance," Arya said, fumbling for her phone with numb fingers. "No!" The woman's hand shot out, grabbing Arya's wrist with a surprising, desperate strength. "No public hospital, no police. It isn't safe." Her emerald eyes darted not at Arya, but past her into the deep shadows of the alley, as if expecting a monster to emerge from the rain. A set of headlights sliced through the darkness, and a black sedan rolled slowly past the mouth of the alley. The woman flinched, trying to shrink back against the wall, a raw, primal fear on her elegant features. The car continued on, but the moment hung in the air thick with unspoken menace. "They're looking for me," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "They found me." The panic in her voice was more alarming than her physical state. Arya made a split-second decision that would irrevocably alter the quiet manuscript of her life. This wasn't just a medical emergency. She had stumbled into something far more dangerous. "My studio is right here." Arya said, her voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the frantic beating of her own heart. "It's warm and dry. Let's get you inside first. We'll figure out the rest from there." Leaning heavily on Arya, the woman struggled to her feet. Each step was an agonizing battle against her failing strength and the fury of the storm. They finally stumbled through the studio door, and Arya slammed it shut. The heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding home, feeling like the final closing of a chapter on her old life. Insect under the soft, warm light, the woman's appearance was even more striking. Around her neck, resting against the damp cashmere, was an exquisite antique gold locket, intricately carved and heavy with secrets. "Thank you," she breathed, sinking into Arya's worn leather armchair. "My name is Celeste Maroro." "Arya Morgan," she replied, draping a thick wool blanket over Celeste's shivering shoulders. Celeste's eyes, clear for a moment, locked onto hers. "Arya, I must ask you to do something for me. An act of faith." She reached into her coat and produced a small, thick business card. It was stark white, bearing only a single embossed phone number. "Call this number. Tell them only this. Celeste needs help. Do not give your name. Do not give this address. They will find us." She paused, a spasm of pain crossing her face. "And one more thing, a warning. From this moment on, trust no one who comes for me. No one." Before Arya could ask what she meant, Celeste's eyes rolled back in her head, and she slumped into the chair unconscious, leaving Arya alone with the storm. A dying stranger, and a promise that felt as heavy and dangerous as a loaded gun. For a paralyzing moment, Arya could only stare at the still form slumped in her armchair. The world outside roared, but inside the studio, a deafening silence had fallen, punctuated only by the frantic ticking of the old regulator clock on the wall. Celeste Morrow was unconscious. A promise had been made, and ruthless men were hunting just beyond her door. Arya's training as a restorer took over, a practiced calm descending over the initial shock. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She knelt beside Celeste, her fingers finding the pulse point on the woman's neck. It was faint, thready, but it was there. A shallow, irregular breath feathered against her cheek. This wasn't just a simple faint. It was a serious medical crisis. Every rational part of her mind screamed to call 911. It was the correct, sane thing to do. But Celeste's words, spoken with the last of her strength, echoed with chilling clarity. "No public hospital, no police. It isn't safe." And the final, most haunting warning, trust no one. Arya's gaze fell to the objects in her hands, the heavy gold locket and the stark white business card. One was a secret, the other a key. To call 911 would be to betray the trust the stranger had placed in her, and potentially deliver her directly into the hands of the very people she was fleeing. To call the cryptic number was to dive headfirst into the abyss, to put her own life into the hands of unknown, powerful forces. She looked at Celeste's pale, serene face, a face that held both aristocratic elegance and profound weariness. She had made a promise not just with her words, but with her actions. When she'd opened her door to a stranger in the storm, she couldn't turn back now. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she picked up her phone. Her fingers felt like ice as she punched in the 10 digits from the card. It rang only once, a short, clipped signal, before the line connected. There was no greeting, no automated message, only a profound and expectant silence charged with energy. "Celeste needs help," Arya said, her voice a low, controlled whisper, repeating the exact words she'd been given. The silence on the other end stretched, and for a terrifying second, she thought the line was dead. She fought the urge to say more, to give the address, to plead for them to hurry. Then a man's voice, deep and devoid of any emotion, spoke a single word. "Location." It was a command, not a question. "A book restoration studio," Arya answered, her voice trembling slightly. "In the alley off Fleet Street, North End." She gave the building number. Another pause, this one shorter. "Acknowledge," the voice stated. It wasn't a confirmation, but another command. "Acknowledged." Arya whispered back. The line clicked, dead. Arya stared at her phone, a cold dread seeping into her bones. What had she just done? Had she summoned help? Or had she just given away their position to the enemy? There was no way to know. All she could do was wait. The next 15 minutes were the longest of her life. She busied herself by making Celeste more comfortable, elevating her feet on a stack of rare folios that she would normally never use as a foot tool. She dampened a cloth and gently wiped Celeste's forehead. The locket she placed carefully on her workbench, its golden gleam a stark contrast to the muted tones of old leather and paper. The studio, once her sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every creak of the old building, every intensified gust of wind sent a jolt of fear through her. She found herself watching the door, expecting at any moment to hear the splintering of wood as the men from the alley returned to finish their work. Then came a knock. It was quiet, precise, and professional. 3 sharp raps. It was utterly different from the brutish pounding she had heard before. Her heart leaped into her throat. She crept to the door, peering through the peephole. 2 men stood in the rain-swept alley. They were dressed in dark, functional clothing, their faces calm and alert. They were not the men from the sedan. Behind them, a woman stood with a large medical duffel bag, her expression intensely focused. "Arya Morgan," a voice called through the door. It was the same deep, emotionless voice from the phone. "We are here for Celeste. Open the door." He knew her name. They had traced the call, found out who she was in minutes. The speed and efficiency were terrifying, but it was also a confirmation. These were Lucian's people. Taking a leap of faith, Arya undid the bolts and opened the door. They moved with an unnerving, silent precision. The woman who introduced herself as Dr. Ares immediately dropped to Celeste's side, her hands a blur of professional activity as she attached sensors and administered a syringe. The 2 men, the one who had spoken and another larger man, secured the room. One checked the window Arya had used, his eyes scanning the alley below. The other stood by the door, a silent, immovable guard. "She's had a significant cardiac event, likely brought on by extreme stress," Dr. Aris reported. After a moment, her voice a low, urgent hum. "She's stabilizing, but she needs to be moved to a secure facility immediately." The man who seemed to be in charge, the one with the cold, watchful eyes, turned to Arya. "The Dukas canvassed this area after you locked the door. One of their men saw you through the window. They have a description. They know this studio is where she disappeared. This location is compromised. You are compromised." It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, brutal statement of fact. "You will need to come with us," he continued. "It is no longer safe for you to remain here." "Come with you," Arya stammered, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. "I can't just leave. This is my home, my work. Your work is a liability." The man set his gaze sweeping over the priceless, irreplaceable books lining her walls. "And your home is now a target. Mr. Morrow has given explicit orders. You are to be brought to him for your own protection." There was no room for argument in his voice. The choice had already been made for her. Dr. Aris and the other men were already loading Celeste onto a sophisticated, collapsible stretcher they had brought in. Arya was given 60 seconds to gather what she needed. In a daze, she grabbed her coat, her purse, and on impulse, the ancient maritime logbook she had been working on. It was a small, tangible piece of her old life, a life that was now being extinguished before her eyes. As she was escorted out into the rain, She took one last look at her studio. It looked just as she had left it, a bubble of warmth and history. But she knew it was an illusion. The darkness from the alley had breached its walls, and she had a chilling feeling she might never be able to return. She was led to a black armored vehicle that had materialized silently in the alley, its engine a low, powerful hum. As the heavy door closed behind her, sealing her inside with the silent, efficient strangers, Arya Morgan knew with absolute certainty that her quiet, patient life was over. The inside of the armored vehicle was a world unto itself, a silent, leather-scented cocoon moving swiftly through a city Arya no longer recognized. The rain-streaked streets of Boston passed by in a blur of neon and shadow, but the tinted, bulletproof glass kept it all at a sterile distance. Arya sat between Elias, the cold-eyed leader, and the other silent guard, feeling less like a person being protected and more like a fragile, valuable package being transported. No one spoke. The only sounds were the low thrum of the powerful engine and the quiet hiss of the tires on the wet pavement. Arya clutched the strap of her purse, the logbook inside a hard, reassuring presence against her side. She was a restorer. She found solace in order in the patient, methodical process of bringing something broken back to wholeness. This sudden violent chaos was the antithesis of her entire being. She glanced at Dr. Eris, who was monitoring Celeste's vitals on a portable tablet with an expression of intense focus. The elderly woman was stable, but still unconscious, lost to a world beyond the immediate danger. The vehicle descended into a private, brightly lit tunnel, the transition from the dark city streets jarring. They were entering the underbelly of a different kind of Boston, a world of wealth and power so vast it had its own hidden infrastructure. The tunnel opened into a pristine white garage, empty save for a row of identical black sedans. They had arrived not at a hospital, but at the roots of a modern-day castle. An express elevator, all polished steel and smoked glass, lifted them skyward in a breathtaking silent ascent. There were no buttons for floors, only a single discreet panel that Elias touched with a keycard. Araya's ears popped as they climbed the pressure of physical manifestation, of her entry into a new and rarefied world. The door slid open, not into a hallway, but directly into the penthouse suite. The sight that greeted Arya stole her breath. It was less an apartment and more a statement of absolute power. A vast open-plan space was encased on three sides by floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike panoramic view of Boston Harbor and the sprawling city below. The storm had begun to break, and the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. The decor was minimalist to the point of being severe. Stark white walls, polished concrete floors, and spare, elegant furniture in shades of black and charcoal. The only spots of color were several large dramatic pieces of abstract art. Banks of computer monitors were set up against one wall, their screens glowing with complex data streams attended to by a few quietly focused individuals. The air was cool still and smelled faintly of ozone and expensive cologne. It was the lair of a very powerful, very controlled predator. And there he was. He stood with his back to them, a tall silhouette against the awakening city, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was speaking in a low voice on the phone, the words too quiet to make out, but the tone was one of effortless command. As the elevator doors chimed softly, he ended the call and turned. If Arya had thought the men downstairs were intimidating, they were mere foot soldiers compared to the king. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that seemed molded to his lean, powerful frame. He had the sharp, aristocratic features of his mother, but where her eyes held a fierce intelligence, his held a chilling stillness. They were the darkest eyes Arya had ever seen. And as his gaze swept over the medical team, his mother, and finally settled on her, she felt as though she were being catalogued, analyzed, and dismissed in a single silent moment. "Report." He said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that vibrated through the silent room. Dr. Eris stepped forward. "She is stable for now, Mr. Marrow. A severe cardiac event exacerbated by extreme stress. We have her sedated. She needs rest and zero external stimuli. See to it," Lucien Marrow commanded. The medical team, with the same silent efficiency, wheeled Celeste's stretcher towards a hallway that presumably led to a private medical wing. Now they were alone, Arya Lucien and his silent sentinels. He took a slow sip from his glass, his dark eyes never leaving her face. The intensity of his scrutiny made her feel exposed, like a fragile manuscript laid bare on his workbench. "A book restore from the North End," he said, his voice a soft, dangerous purr. "An expert in bringing the dead back to life. How fitting." He took a step closer. "My mother is a woman of exceptional caution. For her to run to you, a complete stranger, to entrust you with something she values more than her own life." "You must have a very honest face, Miss Morgan." The condescension in his tone pricked at her fear, igniting a small spark of defiance. "Your mother was in trouble. I helped her, that's all." "That is never all," Lucien countered smoothly. He set his glass down, the click of crystal on the marble countertop startlingly loud. "You made a call, and you held on to something for me." He extended a hand, palm up. It was an unspoken command. Araya's throat felt tight. Her promise to Celeste was the only piece of solid ground she had left. She met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. She said, "I was to give it only to you." A flicker of something surprised respect passed through his dark eyes before it was gone. "I am Lucien." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached into her pocket and retrieved the locket. She stepped forward and placed it in his outstretched palm. As he closed his hand around it, his fingers brushed against hers. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, like a spark of static electricity on a cold winter's night, shot up her arm. She pulled her hand back as if burned. Lucien didn't even flinch, his expression unchanged, but she could have sworn she saw his eyes darken for a fraction of a second. With a practiced, almost dismissive flick of his thumb, he opened the antique clasp. He ignored the intricate carvings and the patina of age, his entire focus on the hollowed-out space inside. He looked at the tiny microchip, then back at Arya. "Tell me her exact words." She said it contained everything you needed to know, Arya recited, her voice steady. "She said to give it only to you and to trust no one else." A humorless smile touched his lips. "Sound advice." He turned to the man at the computer bank. "Dante, come here." The tech expert approached, and Lucien dropped the microchip into his waiting hand. "Find out what my mother thought was worth dying for," he commanded. As Dante moved to the bank of monitors and inserted the microchip into a reader, the atmosphere in the penthouse grew taut with anticipation. Lucien turned from the unfolding digital drama and walked slowly toward Arya, his predatory grace making the vast room feel small and confining. He stopped before her, his dark eyes scrutinizing her, not with malice, but with an unnerving analytical intensity. "You are Arya Sabine Morgan," he stated, his voice a low, even tone. "Born in Port South, New Hampshire, orphaned at age 11. You possess a master's degree in historical preservation from Boston College. You opened your studio folio and quill restoration 4 years ago. You are 2 months behind on your business loan. You volunteer on Saturdays at the public library's literacy program for children. Your preferred coffee is a black Americano from a small cafe on Hover Street. And you are allergic to penicillin." He delivered this information as if reading a weather report. Each detail was a quiet, brutal violation, stripping away every layer of her privacy, every wall she had built around her quiet, unassuming life. The blood drained from Arya's face. It was one thing to be pulled into his world. It was another to realize he had possessed a key to hers all along. How? She whispered the word, barely audible. In my world, knowledge is not just power. It is survival, Lucian replied, his expression unyielding. The moment my mother's safety was compromised, I needed to know every variable in the equation. You, Miss Morgan, became the most important variable. I needed to know if you were a threat, a victim, or something else entirely. A hot surge of anger cut through her fear. I am not a variable in your equation, Mr. Marrow, she said, her voice trembling but defiant. I am a person whose life you and your enemies have just turned upside down. For the first time, a genuine, though fleeting, emotion crossed his face. It was a flicker of respect. That you are, he conceded. And because of that, you are now under my protection. The Dukas will not be as discerning as I was in their research. They will simply see you as a loose end to be eliminated. His point was as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. Her anger deflated, leaving behind the chilling realization of her complete and utter dependency on this dangerous man. Sir? Dante's voice cut through the tension. I'm in. They both turned to the monitors. The chaotic lines of code had resolved into a clean, organized file system. It was a digital ghost, the life's work of a brilliant accountant who had lived in the heart of a criminal empire. Dante's fingers flew across the keyboard, opening the primary directory. The screens bloomed with a horrifying tapestry of corruption. It was everything. Decades of offshore bank transfer shell corporations with respectable names and meticulously kept ledgers detailing bribes to a shocking number of city officials, police captains, and state senators. Arya watched in stunned silence as a diagram appeared, mapping out how the Duca family had been systematically laundering millions in illegal profits through a network of philanthropic foundations. Photographs flashed across the screen, smiling politicians cutting ribbons at new community centers funded by Duca money. Hospital wings with the Duca family name emblazoned in bronze. Charity galas where Boston's elite toasted the generosity of men who were poisoning their city. They built their public reputation as saints on a foundation of sin. Lucian murmured, his voice tight with a cold, controlled fury. And my mother documented every single transaction. He pointed to a complex encryption key displayed in a corner of the screen. That is her signature, her design. She built their financial systems, and she built the fail-safe to burn them to the ground. He zoomed in on a specific document. The Duca family killed my father when he discovered the full extent of this and threatened to expose them. He stated the words flat and heavy like stones dropping into a deep well. For 20 years, my mother allowed me to believe it was a simple mob, hid a rivalry gone too far. She hid this truth to protect me. Arya looked at Lucian's profile, seeing the hard lines of a man forged in the fires of a lie. He had built his own empire, a powerful counterweight to the Ducas, all fueled by a thirst for a vengeance that was aimed at the wrong target. As she watched the network of corrupt charities flash on the screen, a half-forgotten memory surfaced. A grant her literacy program had received a few years ago. A grant that had saved them from closure. The Morrow Foundation, she said aloud, the connection clicking into place. Your foundation funds educational and arts programs in underprivileged neighborhoods, including the library where I volunteer. Lucian turned to her, a questioning look in his eyes. That wasn't random, was it? She pressed on the pieces falling together. All this time, you've been using your power to counter theirs. They use charities to launder their money and poison the city, and you use your foundation to try and heal it. You've been fighting your father's war all along without even knowing the real reason why." The observation hung in the air between them. It was a moment of profound, unexpected insight that seemed to momentarily disarm him. He saw that she understood not just his power, but the hidden driving purpose behind it. Before he could respond, Dante spoke again, his voice hushed with awe. "Sir, there's another partition more heavily encrypted. It's not part of the Duca files. The directory is labeled with a single word." "What is it?" Lucian demanded. Dante looked up from his screen, his expression grim. "Nathaniel." The name hung in the sterile air of the penthouse, heavy and resonant with unspoken history. Nathaniel the ghost in Lucian's machine. The father he had spent a lifetime avenging, now the subject of a secret his mother had guarded for over 20 years. Lucian's face was a mask of stone, but Arya could see a storm gathering in the depths of his dark eyes. The first revelation that his father was a partner to the Ducas had cracked the foundations of his world. She feared this next one would bring the entire structure crashing down. "Open it," Lucian commanded, his voice a low, strained whisper that was more menacing than any shout. Dante's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "Sir, the encryption on this partition is on another level. It's personal. A fail-safe within a fail-safe. Breaking it could corrupt the data." "I did not ask for a risk assessment, Dante. I gave you an order," Lucian said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. Dante swallowed hard and nodded, his fingers flying across the keys in a blur of motion, lines of complex code scrolled across the main screen. For a full minute, the only sound in the room was the soft click of the keyboard and the distant, mournful cry of a foghorn from the harbor. Then a single file icon appeared on the screen, an audio log dated 21 years ago. "Play it," Lucian breathed. A faint hiss of static filled the room, and then a voice. A man's voice, younger than Lucian's, but with the same deep timbre laced with an almost unbearable desperation. It was Nathaniel Morrow. "I can't do this anymore." Celeste, the ghost in the machine, said, his voice raw with anguish. "It started as a game, a way to prove I was smarter than all of them, to beat the system at its own terms, a way to build a future for us." A second voice joined the first, belonging to a younger, fiercely protective Celeste. "Then we walk away, Nathaniel. We take Lucian and we disappear. We have enough. We can start over somewhere they'll never find us." A bitter, broken laugh came from Nathaniel. "Walk away, Celeste. There is no walking away. Marco Duca doesn't have partners. He has possessions. He'll never let us go. He knows I am the only one who designed it, the only one who can burn it all down from the inside." There was a pause filled with the sound of a shaky breath. "And it's worse than I ever imagined. It's not just money anymore. He's using the charities, the ones I helped create. He's using them to fund human trafficking operations. He's bringing young girls into the city, Celeste. Girls the same age as our son's future classmates. I created this monster, and now it's devouring innocence." The pain in his voice was so profound. It was a physical presence in the room. Arya felt a knot of empathy tighten in her chest. "There is only one way to stop him." Nathaniel continued, his voice hardening with a terrible resolve. "The evidence has to get out, all of it. I've backed it up, hidden it with you. It's our only legacy, Celeste. Not the money, not the power, but the truth. It will destroy them. It will likely destroy me too, but I cannot let this stand." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more profound than any sound. Lucian stood completely still, his gaze fixed on the silent monitor. His father, not a villain, not a simple victim. He was something far more complex and tragic, a flawed man who had made a pact with the devil and who had tried to find redemption at the end, paying for it with his life. The carefully constructed narrative of Lucien's existence, the righteous son avenging his murdered heroic father, had been obliterated in the space of a 3-minute recording. Arya saw it then, the truth that had been hidden from him. She found herself stepping closer, her voice soft but clear in the silent room. She wasn't protecting his memory, Lucien. She was protecting you. He turned his head slowly to look at her, his eyes hollowed out by the revelation. If you had known this truth as a boy— Arya continued, the pieces clicking into place with undeniable clarity. If you knew your father died trying to be a whistleblower, you would have gone after the Dukas with all the righteous fury in the world, and they would have crushed you. She didn't let you believe a lie. She gave you a different story, a simpler one to keep you alive. She gave you 20 years to build your own fortress, to become strong enough to survive the war she knew was coming. The truth of her words settled over him, reframing 2 decades of deception, not as a betrayal, but as a mother's desperate, heartbreaking sacrifice before the weight of it all could crush him. A shrill, insistent beep pierced the silence. All heads snapped to the main security monitor, where a red alert was flashing. Alias was at the console in an instant. "Sir, we have an incoming message from an unsecured channel," he said, his voice grim. "It's from Duca. Put it on screen." Lucien commanded his personal agony, instantly shelved the cold, decisive leader, snapping back into place. An image resolved on the main monitor. It was a live feed from a dark, dample-looking room. A woman was tied to a chair, a dirty rag stuffed in her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. Arya gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Mrs. Callahan! It was the kind elderly woman who ran the art studio in her building, the one who always brought her tea and praised her delicate work. Elias's face was grim. "They took her an hour ago from her home. They know she was your neighbor, that you were friendly." A text overlay appeared on the screen, the words stark and brutal. "The chip, for the woman. You have 1 hour. After that, she dies slowly." The abstract danger, the generational feud, the digital ghosts, it all coalesced into this single horrifying image. An innocent woman was going to die, and it was Arya's fault. Lucien looked from the terrified face of Mrs. Callahan on the screen to Arya's stricken expression. The impossible choice had materialized. Sacrifice the truth. His father died for the only weapon that could bring down his lifelong enemies, or sacrifice the life of an innocent woman caught in the crossfire he had sworn to protect. He turned to Arya, and the icy calm was back in his eyes. But this time, she saw something else beneath it. The crushing weight of a world where there were no good choices. "Welcome to my world, Miss Morgan," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. Now you see the price of things. The image of Mrs. Callahan's terrified face burned itself into Arya's mind. The abstract horror of the past 24 hours had just been given a name and a face she knew and cared for. The price of this war, which Lucien had spoken of with such cold detachment, was suddenly a debt she felt personally responsible for. "Give them the chip," she said again, her voice no longer pleading but sharp with a desperate newfound strength. "Her life is not a pawn in your generational feud, Lucien. And if I do," he shot back, his own anguish twisting into a cold, hard fury. "They kill her anyway, to silence her. Then they come for you. Then they come for my mother. They will use this victory to consolidate their power. And the trafficking, the corruption, it all continues. My father's sacrifice, his attempt at redemption, becomes a footnote in a story where they win. Is that the price you are willing to pay?" Elias Ever, the pragmatist, stepped forward. "Sir, we can mount a tactical assault. We have a probable location on where they're holding the woman. We can extract her. The probability of her surviving a direct assault is less than 30%. Dante countered from his console, not looking up. Duca will see her as disposable the moment the first shot is fired. They were trapped. A violent solution meant Mrs. Callahan's almost certain death. Surrender meant a slower, more insidious defeat that would cost countless other lives down the line. They were at an impasse, a perfect bloody stalemate. "You're all thinking like soldiers," Arya said, her voice cutting through the tense masculine energy in the room. The men turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from Lucian's frustrated intensity to Elias's outright skepticism. "You see a fortress to be sieged, a battle to be won," she continued, an idea born of her own unique world beginning to crystallize. She walked towards the monitors, not looking at the faces of the criminals, but at the intricate web of connections, the flow of money, the structure of their empire. It was like looking at a damaged, illuminated manuscript. The artwork was corrupt, the gold leaf tarnished, but the underlying structure was still there. You don't burn a priceless, damaged book just because some of its pages are poison, she said, thinking aloud. You do that, and the story is lost forever. You create a vacuum. You create chaos. No, you don't burn it. You restore it. You carefully unbind it page by page. You find the source of the rot. You clean it. You mend the tears. And you rebind it, making it whole and strong again. "This is not a book," Miss Morgan Elias said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "This is a war." "No," Arya countered, turning to face them, her eyes alike, with a fierce intelligence they hadn't seen before. "You're wrong. It's a system, a broken, corrupt system." And this chip, she gestured to the reader where the small piece of silicon lay, to blow it all up. "It's the Restorer's Manual. It tells you exactly how it was put together and how to take it apart." She turned to Lucian, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Your first instinct is to release everything, to expose the entire empire, in one cataclysmic act of justice for your father. Duca expects that. He expects a full frontal assault, either with weapons or with information. So we do neither." She pointed a steady finger at a name on the screen, a name linked to a dozen shell corporations and a federal judgeship. You don't pull the entire building down. You pull out a single, load-bearing pillar. You find the most respected, untouchable journalist in this city, someone Duca can't buy or bury, and you anonymously leak one file. One perfect, undeniable, career-destroying file on a man like Federal Judge Albright. You don't just start a gang war. You trigger a federal investigation. You create a firestorm that Duca cannot control. One that threatens to burn his powerful friends who have sheltered him for decades. The room was silent. The sheer audacity of her plan was sinking in. It was a move of immense sophistication, a declaration of war not on the streets but in the halls of power. "He'll know it's us," Lucian stated, his mind clearly working through the strategic implications. "He will," Arya agreed. "And that's the point. It's a demonstration of power. It tells him you don't just have dirt. You have a scalpel and you know exactly where to cut. It tells him you have the power to dismantle his entire world, piece by piece, starting with the very people who make him feel untouchable, and it will terrify him." And while he is terrified, she continued pressing her advantage. While his allies are panicking, and the federal investigators are crawling all over his backyard, you offer him a way out, a temporary reprieve, the life of an innocent woman for your silence. You get Mrs. Callahan out of the line of fire, and you reset the entire game. Only this time, you're not just a rival. You're the man holding the strings. Lucian stared at her, And for a long, breathless moment, she saw the war within him, the primal urge for bloody revenge wearing with this new, colder, more intelligent path. He was seeing the world through her eyes, not as a battlefield, but as a complex text waiting to be rewritten. Finally, he gave a single sharp nod. The decision was made. A new path was chosen. Dante, he commanded, his voice filled with a new chilling resolve. Isolate the Albright file. Everything, every transaction, every photo, every phone call. Encrypt it and send it to the designated media contact now. He turned to Elias. Get me a secure channel to Marco Duca. I'll let him watch his world start to burn for an hour before I call. Then he looked at Arya, and the cold respect in his eyes had deepened into something more complex, something akin to awe. You were right, he said softly. I've been trying to win my father's war. It's time I started fighting my own. The hour that followed was the most excruciating of Arya's life. She watched from the cold, detached comfort of the penthouse as the plan she had authored was set into motion. Dante, with the focus of a surgeon, and carved out the digital life of Judge Alba Bright and delivered it to a secure journalistic server. Within 30 minutes, the first tremors were felt. A single explosive report from an online investigative journal citing irrefutable evidence of judicial corruption. The story was a shark in the water, and the blood spread instantly. Lucien watched the fallout on a dozen different news feeds, his face impassive, but Arya could see the grim satisfaction in his eyes. He let the fire burn for a full hour, letting the pressure build on Marco Duca from a dozen different fronts, as panicked phone calls were surely being made across the city and all the way to Washington, D.C. Finally, he gave the signal. The call was made. The terms were delivered. In exchange, don a deserted warehouse in the Charlestown Navy Yard. As his team prepared to move out, Lucien turned to Arya. You will remain here with my mother. Elias and 3 of his men will stay with you. That is not a request. This time, Arya didn't argue. She had set the pieces in motion. She had to trust him to see the game through. Just bring her home, Lucien, she whispered. The hours before dawn were a blur of anxiety. Celeste was awake now, sitting with Arya in the vast, silent living area, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She had been briefed on the situation, on the truth of her husband's past, on the kidnapping, on Arya's audacious plan. You have given him a great gift, my dear, Celeste said, her emerald eyes full of a sad wisdom. Not just a strategy, but a new path, a chance to be the man his father only realized he should have been at the very end. Arya watched the tactical display on one of the screens, a map of the Navy Yard crawling with red and blue icons. I just hope it works. It will, Celeste said with confidence, because for the first time, Lucien is not fighting with rage. He is fighting with purpose. The warehouse was a skeletal ruin against the bruised pre-dawn sky, smelling of salt rust and decay. Lucien stepped out of his vehicle, flanked only by 2 of his men, and walked into the cavernous space. Marco Duca was there, his usual arrogance replaced by a visible twitching tension. Mrs. Callahan stood beside him, held by one of his thugs, her eyes wide with fear. You've caused a lot of trouble, Morrow. Duca spat, forgoing any pleasantries. The trouble has just begun. Marco Lucien replied, his voice calm and resonant in the echoing space. This is your one and only chance to contain it. Let her go, the chip Duca demanded. Give me the chip and the file on Albright. Lucien laughed, a short, cold sound. You misunderstand the new reality. The file on Albright is already gone. It is a ghost you will be chasing for the rest of your career. The chip stays with me. It is my insurance to guarantee your good behavior. Today, you give me Mrs. Callahan. In return, you get my silence. The leaks stop. You will cease your trafficking operations. You will begin the process of legitimizing your businesses under my indirect oversight, and you will never, ever touch a civilian connected to me again." Duca's face contorted with rage. "You walk in here and give me orders!" He snapped his fingers from the shadows in the rafters and behind rusted machinery. More than a dozen of his men emerged, their weapons trained on Lucian. "You are surrounded!" Lucian didn't even glance at them. He simply raised his hand and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. And then hell was unleashed. Not with gunfire, but with light and sound. A series of blinding military rice spotlights mounted on silent drones outside the warehouse windows burst to life, flooding the entire space with a light so intense it was like staring into the sun. Simultaneously, a low, gut-turning frequency sound emitter was activated, disorienting Duca's men. From outside, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a helicopter grew deafeningly loud as it hovered directly over the warehouse's fragile roof. And on the chest of every single one of Duca's men, a small, steady red dot appeared. The laser sights of a dozen hidden snipers. In the penthouse, Arya watched the tactical feed with a gasp. It was a perfect, silent, overwhelming display of technological and strategic superiority. Lucian hadn't walked into an ambush. He had created a cage. Duca stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and horror as he realized he had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. His trap had been turned against him. "This is the new landscape, Marco." Lucian's voice cut through the noise, calm and absolute. "The old ways of street brawls and bullets are over. My father tried to destroy your house of cards. I am simply claiming ownership of it. Now for the last time, let her go." Defeated, his empire held hostage. Duca gave a jerky nod. The thug holding Mrs. Callahan shoved her forward. One of Lucian's men moved swiftly, shielding her and guiding her back to their vehicle. Lucian held Marco Duca's terrified gaze for one moment longer. "The restoration has begun," he said before turning his back and walking away, leaving his enemies standing alone, trapped in a cage of light and sound, a king dethroned in his own crumbling castle. By the time Lucian returned to the penthouse, the full light of morning was streaming through the windows, glinting off the glass and steel of the city. The storm had passed Peakpall, leaving behind a world washed clean. Arya stood by the window, her heart still pounding from the tension of the last hour. She saw Mrs. Callahan being helped into a waiting car downstairs safe. A wave of relief so profound it made her knees weak washed over her. The elevator doors opened and Lucian strode in. The cold, dangerous aura was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. The weight of his false past had been lifted, and in its place was the heavy but clear purpose of a new future. Celeste met him first, embracing her son with a fierce, silent love that spoke volumes. Then he walked to where Arya stood by the window overlooking the city. That was, for all intents and purposes, now his. "It's done," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "A truce is in place. Mrs. Callahan is safe and on her way home. She will have no memory of the last 24 hours, just a vague sense of a bad dream." "And the Ducas?" Arya asked. "They will now play by a new set of rules," he said. "My rules." He looked out at the sprawling metropolis, at the hospitals and community centers bearing his enemy's name. "My father wanted to build things to heal this city. He got lost in the darkness along the way. With this evidence as a hammer, I can force the Ducas to do what he originally intended. They will fund the clinics, not the cartels. They will build the schools, not the brothel. I will finish what he started the right way." It was an audacious, morally complex vision to use the architecture of a criminal empire to force it to do good. It was a restorer's gambit on a citywide scale. He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm and steady. a silent anchor in the new, turbulent world she now inhabited. You did this, Arya. You saw a path no one else could see. You, the woman who mends the stories of the past, have given mine a new future. Arya looked down at their joined hands, then back at him. The fear she had felt was gone, replaced by a complex, fluttering emotion she didn't dare name. Her quiet, predictable life was a memory, a story in a book whose cover was now closed. What lay ahead was an unwritten page, terrifying and uncertain, but also filled with a strange and powerful hope. "What happens to me now?" she whispered. Lucian's thumb gently brushed against her knuckles. He brought her hand to his lip and pressed a soft, lingering kiss there. His dark eyes, now holding a profound warmth, met hers. "Now," he said, his voice a low promise, "you help me write the next chapter." And together they stood before the window watching the morning light spread across Boston. The forgotten legacy of Nathaniel Morrow, a legacy of a flawed man's final desperate reach for redemption, had been found. It would not be restored with patience and glue, but with power, compassion, and the unlikely partnership of a crime lord and a book restorer bound together by a whisper in a storm. Their story, she realized, was only just beginning.